tonight should be in the merit of those souls that tragically lost their life 6 days ago. So this time last week we were learning about Lag BaOmer. We were so excited. We were on a high. Lag BaOmer is one of the most highest spiritual, holiest days. And to go to Meron, my heart and soul was in Meron. And the following night I had the pleasure of learning some Zohar and putting on the live feed of Meron and singing with the songs. And then the atmosphere changed and a terrible tragedy occurred. 45 of the highest souls, holiest souls, Hashem took them to the yeshiva Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So tonight, first and foremost, this should be in the merit of the Aliyah Neshama of these holy souls, and moreover, for the consolation for their families. And I'd like to say their names, because I've been crying all week, and this is now, thank God, our Wednesday night class is our weekly way to talk about our relationship with Hashem and our relationship with the Torah and our relationship with the Jewish people. And therefore, I think it's apt to say the names. So the Torah we're learning should be Eloi Nishmas, Menachem Osher, HaKohen, Chanoich, Shimon, Moshe, brothers Yeshua and Moshe, who were just 9 and 14 years old, who tragically died last week. Chaim, and other brothers, Moshe Mordechai and Yosef David from Sfas, Yaakov Elchanan from Elad, Nachman from Bet Shemesh. Great rabbis died, Rabbi Eliezer Goldberg of Bet Alit, Rabbi Yehuda Leib, Rubin of Bet Shemesh, Shmuel of Betar, Eliyahu, only 16, Simcha Bunim, Yosef Yehuda, Yishai, David, Chen from Cholon, Israel from Bet Shemesh, Chaim from Bet Shemesh, Elkanah from Yerushalayim, Yonatan from Givat Shmuel, Yedidia, only 22, Elazar, Yosef Mastroff, 17, Yedidia, only 13 of Bnei Brak, from Bnei Brak, Eliezer Yitzchak, also only 13 years old, Rahman al-Islam, Hashem Yirachim, Ariel, Yosef Greenbaum, Moshe Levi, 14, Ariel, Moshe, Mordechai, Shlomo Zalman from Tzfas, and then several from abroad, because this was a tragedy from the whole world. From Montreal, Shraga, from Monroe, New York, Eliezer Tzvi, Menachem from New York, Daniel Morris from New Jersey, that many of you might have been there at the funeral, Yosef from Cleveland, Yosef Amram, United States, Moshe Bergman from the United Kingdom, Avram Daniel from Argentina, and Dov from Montreal. Oi, what is going on? What is going on? What is going on? There's 600 people sitting Shiva. 600 people sitting Shiva. And thousands of family and cousins who are mourning right now. And I really feel that the Jewish people's role right now is to feel the mourning, feel the pain. It was my father's yahrzeit on Monday, and I, in a sense, went from being a mourner from my father to now being a mourner amongst the Jewish people, because we're all mourners right now. This is the Shiva. This is the week of Shiva. We should feel the pain. Some people say, like, why we, this wasn't our family. It is one family. And I really believe mystically that when we cry tears, it's going to take away tears eventually from the family members, because we're sharing the burden. We're sharing the tears. And moreover, I truly, genuinely believe that this is now what Hashem wants. The 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva all died. Those on Instagram, by the way, could be a better connection on Facebook. Just go to the profile of Avi Hill on Facebook and it could be a better connection. The 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died. And the Talmud says, that they didn't respect each other. And then on Lag BaOmer, the day they're meant to stop dying, another 45 died. And they weren't the ones who weren't respecting each other. From all our reports, they are the holies of the holies. They were the most special, special, special souls. Like it says when Aaron's children died, Nadav and Avihu. It says, Be'krovai HaKadesh. Hashem says, I sanctify myself with those closest to me. So I believe that the 45 that passed away were comparable to the tragedy of Nadav and Avihu, where Aaron's response was by Yidom Aaron. He was silent. It wasn't the time to shout and to scream and to complain and to... it wasn't the time. It wasn't the time. Now's not the time for the blame game. Now's the time to feel the pain. To feel the pain. There's a posuk in this week's Sedra, in Bechukosai, which really made me shiver and have a chill. You see, this week, Sedra should also be like Ila Nishmas, Sherry's grandmother's Yortzeit, Malka Basler. It's unfortunately the part in the Torah of what's called the Teichachos, the rebukes, the punishments where Hashem says, if you don't do what you're meant to do, there's going to be terrible, terrible things happening. And there's this verse which I keep reading, chapter 26, verse 37. If you check it out in Leviticus 26:37. And it says, V'choshlu ish ba'ochiv. Which means Hashem says, there'll be a punishment, there'll be a tragedy where brothers will stumble over each other. Where brothers will stumble over each other. We literally had that last week. Brothers were stumbling over each other. And sometimes both the brothers died. There's two sets of brothers that died. Other siblings, that some died, some didn't die. And we don't have prophecy. But we can say midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Hashem saying that there must be a problem that brothers are stumbling over each other, and we're all brothers. And since Rabbi Akiva's students died because they didn't treat each other well, I just think, if you want to know what Rabbi Hill's take is, one of the lessons I'm trying to really learn is make sure we're really meticulous from now and forever to love each other, to care for each other, not to stumble over each other, not to step on each other. Too many people, doesn't matter, you just want to go forward in your career and you don't matter who you walk all over and trespass. That's wrong. That's not the Jewish way. That's not the Torah way. Let's learn lessons. Let's learn lessons. So tonight we're going to speak about reincarnation, but just for the first few minutes, I'd like to tell you what's going on in my thoughts of what the Torah response, I believe, should be to what happens in Meron. The first point being, a lot of people, and it breaks my heart when I see on social media, a lot of people are blaming this and blaming that, and it's that person's fault and that person's fault, and it could have been averted if this, that, the other. That is not, my dear friends, the Torah approach. Let me give you the Torah approach. Let me give you the Torah approach. There's a true story of a big Rosh Hashiva, a big Sadiq, called Rabbi Avi HIll Feinstein, who had a daughter who had terrible asthma. And they had 3 nebulizers, 3 sprays to make sure that even if one got lost, second got lost, they'd always find them. The family always knew where it was. And one fateful night, the daughter had an attack. And everyone went to look for the spray, and they couldn't find the spray. They couldn't find any of the nebulizers. They couldn't find them. And every minute's precious, and they couldn't find, and they couldn't find, and they called the ambulance, and they called Hatzalah. And by the time they got there, the girl had died. And a few hours later, they found the sprays. She had it under her bed. And they were berating themselves. Why didn't we look under the bed? Why didn't we look under the bed? Oy, 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 if only we had looked under the bed, our daughter, our sister would be alive. And a big Sadiq called Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky, that some of you might have heard of, came to the Shiva house. And he saw how much in pain they were. First and foremost from guilt. They were having this guilt. And he said to them, hello, don't you know that the tradition, that this word called ishtadlus, which we've got to do our bit, that we've got to make sure that all our bases are covered, that we've got to not rely on a miracle, and we've got to be sensible and responsible. That only works, he says, when you're looking to the future, when you're planning, when you're preparing. But it doesn't work in retrospect. It doesn't work looking back. It's useless. It's untrue. If something happens, Hashem decided it happens. End of. Hashem runs the world. We say, Ani ma'am emuna shalema. Sha'bayre yisparach shemayihu bayre omanik. Hashem not just created, he runs the world. God sustains the world. Everything that happens is from Hashem. For whatever reason, which is out of our remit, of our understanding, Hashem decided to pluck 45 holy roses. The first introduction to the Zohar. The Zohar starts talking about roses. Hashem literally plucked those 45 roses from the garden. And yes, should we be learning lessons going forward about the safety there? Absolutely. Should we be learning lessons? Why on earth the main stairway was blocked off? Which literally Hashem only knows why that is, because no one's given a good answer of why. The exit where they all tragically passed away, everyone was forced to go down that exit. Obviously that can't happen again, and we need to make preparations to ensure that we do safety better next time. But let's not kid ourselves and think that that wasn't from Hashem. Let's not have a lack of emunah and say, oh, if only it would have been different, things would have been different. That's not the Torah approach, my friends. And by the way, in your own lives, this can help you tremendously. Because if any of you are maybe suffering from some trauma and you're blaming yourself, you're saying that if only I would have done it differently. If any of you think that to certain scenarios you are in your life, which you don't like, is maybe because you made some wrong moves. Actually, we don't look at it in that way in the Torah. Learn lessons going forward. Again, this is the topic of a whole class in and of itself, which we can't give it time to today. Happy to come back to it. But essentially, the Torah approach is whatever's happened in the past from Hashem. Going forward, learn lessons. But then again, when something happens, emunah is, it's from Hashem. Emunah is from Hashem. Give you another story. Very short one. A big tzaddik in Jerusalem called Rabbi Avi HIll had problems with his legs. Went to the top doctor. The doctor says, we have to amputate the legs. I'm sorry. Nothing we can do. He amputated the legs. When they came out of the operation, the surgeons said to the family, I have to tell you, we've made a mistake. We've made a mistake. We made a mistake. We didn't need to amputate in the end. Please forgive us. And when they got home, and then weeks later, the family was so tzabroken, they were so sad. And this Sadiq, Rabbi Avi HIll, kept saying, are you crazy, everybody? Do you think that it's the doctor's fault I don't have legs? Hashem's decided for whatever reason. No, that's from Hashem. Emunah means whatever Hashem does is from Him. Whatever happens in life is from Hashem. Which means the following. Emunah is not just when things are going good, when things are going exactly how you want it. Everything's hunky-dory. Everything's beautiful. The sun's shining. Money's coming in. Your relationship's going wonderful. Oh, I have emunah in Hashem. We don't need emunah then, my friends. Do you know when you need emunah? Do you know when you need emunah? You need emunah when things are going pear-shaped, as we say. When things are not going well. When things are miserable. When chaos is unfolding, when there's balagans, when there's tragedy and there's trauma and you can't see God there. That's when emunah is needed. Emunah means faith. Faith is not when things are simple. Faith is when we're in terrible pain. And then that's the emunah. That's when the leap of faith needs to kick in and say, Hashem, I do not understand what you're doing, but one day I will, and I know you love me, and I know you're merciful, and I know you're compassionate. We just can't see it from this vantage point right now. We can't see it. So that's the first part. Let's not attach blame. Second part, and again, you have to understand something. I was watching the singing, put on my Facebook profile, that beautiful song they sang just before they passed away, that the whole souls that were there at Meron were singing the tune of 1942 when Rav Israel David Faustek, who was the chazan in Mojitz, he was in the cattle truck going to Treblinka, and he started singing Ani Mamin, Ani Mamin, Ani Mamin, Oy Ani Mamin. He started composing a song about Mashiach. B'yemunah sheleima. And if you go to my Facebook status or you go to YouTube and watch the song before, the Ani Mamin, it's chilling because the unity and the holiness is palpable. I felt the holiness. Thousands of people were singing, Hashem, I'm ready for Mashiach. I'm ready for Mashiach. I believe in you, Hashem. I have a full iman. I don't want to live the world as it is. I want a better world, a utopian world, a world of redemption. I'm ready and I believe in Mashiach, and everyone was singing it. And Hashem said no. Hashem said no. Hashem said, you're not ready. You've got so much more to do. 45 souls can now come to the yeshiva of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But everybody else has got so much more to do. We've got so much more to do. And the question is, if it was so holy a time, Meron, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Lag BaOmer, the time when it's meant to be helping with the salvation. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says himself, I can help the world turn Hashem's din to rachamim. And yet there was tremendous din last Thursday night. How do we understand it? My answer is we're not meant to. We're not meant to. We're not meant to understand it. The Klausenberger Rebbe, who survived the Holocaust but lost 11 children and lost his wife, lost his whole family in the Holocaust. And after the Holocaust, they said to him, how do you understand what Hashem has done? He looked at them and said the following, I prefer not to understand, but to stay in this world, than to understand and be in Olam Haba now, be in the world to come now. Being part of being in this world means we don't understand. We've got a limited view, very limited, incredibly limited. And we need to deal with that and accept that. And that's where faith comes in. When tragedy occurs, which makes no sense, we need our faith at that point. We're not meant to make sense of it. It does not make sense in a certain way at all. And he says the beautiful thing, the Klausenberger Rebbe says, listen to this, it's worth coming tonight just to hear these words. Why do we close our eyes when we say Shema and put our right hand over our eyes? Why do we say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad? A, have your eyes open. B, at least close your eyes. B, dafka, you putting your right hand over your eye. Why are we doing that? The Klausenberger Rebbe says something so deep. So deep. He says, because your faith in Hashem, when we're saying Hashem, which is Yudke Vovke, mercy, Elokeinu, which is justice, when we're trying to understand that mercy and justice is all the same in Hashem, you can't see it with your eyes open. The eyes open, it makes no sense. You've got to close your eyes, and it's internal, it's spiritual, it's emotional. In society, they say, seeing is believing. In Kabbalah, we say, believing is seeing. First of all, believe, then see. Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, at the end of the whole story, when he thought he lost Joseph for 22 years, and the whole carnage and the crazy story with the brothers selling Joseph and going to Egypt, at the end, that moment that Jacob meets Joseph, Yaakov meets Joseph, what does he say? He says, let's say Shema. And he closed his eyes and put his right hand, and Yaakov said, Shema Yisrael. He said, now I see Hashem. For the past 22 years, when my eyes were open, nothing makes sense. Nothing makes sense. Emunah comes actually from what you don't see, from what you do see. When you open up your eyes and you see that everyone's, this week's Sedra tells you that if you do good, you get good. And if you do bad, you get bad. And yet, last week, the holiest of people did tremendously holy things, and the worst thing happened, seemingly. So it shows, what do we know? What do we understand? So you close your eyes and say, Hashem, I don't understand, but I love you anyway. And I have emunah in you. There's a beautiful father who's mourning, and he's been interviewed, and he says, Hashem, you've taken away my 2 sons, but don't take away my faith. Don't take away my emunah. If they can say that, we can say that. The Ramban had a student who was very close to, who was dying. And he was so sad, the Ramban, he wrote a letter with his own handwriting and signed it his name and gave it to the student and said, when in a few hours you're going to be leaving this world and going to Gan Eden, there's 7 levels of heaven. You're going to go to the 7th highest one. When it gets to that gate, you're going to see the angel at the gate. I want you to give the angel this letter and get back to me with an answer. And it basically said, why? Why, Hashem? Why are you taking him from me at this age? And a few hours later, and amazingly, that's a true story, this letter was actually buried with the boy. The Ramban asked for it to be buried with the boy. He was now buried with the boy. And a few days later, the boy came to the Ramban in a dream and said, Rebbe, you were right, I was allowed into the highest level of Gan Eden, and there's 7 levels, and I was allowed into the highest part. And there was an angel as you described him, and I had your letter. But Rebbe, it's embarrassing to even give him the letter. Because up here, there's no questions. Up here, there's no questions. There's no question. And the Ramban writes this and explains this. And I'll just finish off before we begin to talk about reincarnation, maybe a way to connect what happened last week to reincarnation, which is obviously innately connected. But a very powerful story I heard. Very powerful story. About a man called Dov Mirza. Dov Mirza was a man in France, in a kind of obscure town in France, which didn't have a strong Jewish community. But he was passionate about this town needs a mikveh. We need a mikveh. Somehow there are some Jews here that want to go to the mikveh. We need to create a mikveh in this town. And somehow we're going to do that. And he raised money, and he literally built a mikveh in his garden through his sweat, blood, and tears. And he built a mikveh. And obviously he had children, and he was always worried. He didn't want the children to go anywhere near it. So they put all the ishtadus, they put all the precautions. They put a bolt high up. They always locked it. They said, always be careful to close the door, close the door, close the door. He built the mikveh. People started using it. And tragically, his son, he had 10 boys. The youngest boy, he was 1 year and 3 months. One day, he managed to somehow find himself in the mikveh. And they found him dead, passed away. And it became a great pain in the town. They had no understanding. Think about it. You're doing the most beautiful mitzvah, and a tragedy happens because of the mitzvah. Doesn't make sense spiritually. Doesn't make sense. The father couldn't deal with it. He was broken. And one night he had a dream. And he saw this great rabbi with a beautiful long white beard, who introduced himself as one of the Balei Tosfos, one of the sages at the time of the Tosfos. And he explains that he was killed in the Crusades, Al Kiddush Hashem, with blood all over him. And when he ascended to Gan Eden, he was allowed to go to a very high place. But when it came to his court case, he said, Hashem, there's something I'm missing. I never got a chance to go to the mikveh after I passed away. Normally there's something we do when Someone passes away, they have tahara, they have purification. They go in the mikveh, it cleanses them and helps them get to even a higher place. And this Baal Tosfos begged Hashem that one day he should be brought back to a family that's so holy, that's so special, to a holy mikveh. That one day he can come back and have his tahara. And the Baal Tosfos said to this man, David, because of your Mesiras Nefesh, your sacrifice for the mikveh, that was the mikveh that they chose, that I really wanted to purify me. And just that you know that I'm telling you the truth, that you know this isn't some kind of illusion, I make you a pledge and a promise that this time next year you'll have a new baby, but this time it will be a girl. And when that girl is born, you'll tell everybody about your dream. And that your son was really a reincarnation of me. And when something that seems to be a terrible tragedy, and is a terrible tragedy, but there's a bigger picture, and there's many lives. And that's where we're going to start tonight. Because the Kabbalistic view is that there's a principle called Gilgalim, Gilgal and Neshamot. All of ours are essentially different chapters in a book. You're not just the one book. There's Ollie Burns there. It's not just Ollie Burns. That's it. Ollie, my dear friend, you're a chapter in your book. How do I know that? Because Hashem doesn't make new souls every baby that's born. Everything's recycling of the soul of Adam and Eve for a start. The initial Adam Kadmoin, the initial Adam and Eve, even before the physical Adam and Eve. We're all part of that soul. And then the mystics explain every Jewish soul comes from the 600,000 root souls at Sinai. We all come from part of that. So we've all been here probably many times before, as we're going to learn about. There's a beautiful verse in Tehillim, in Psalms. If you want to check it out, Psalm number 19, verse 10, which says, Mishpatei Hashem emes sodku yachtov. That the justice of Hashem is true when the righteous are all together. Only when everything comes together. Only at the end, when every soul, like we had this story, when a little boy dies in a mikveh and everyone is just full of agony and trauma. But to know that it's just the latest chapter in a much bigger book, which if you read the previous chapters about, that soul actually begged to come back, to go in a mikveh, to achieve ultimate purification in the next world, things start making more sense. You know, it's interesting. As you know, we spoke about the afterlife 2 weeks ago, and it was always planned that tonight we're going to speak about Gilgal and Neshama's reincarnation. It just so happens after the tragedy of last week, I think it's something we need to hear, because maybe it can give us a little bit of comfort to understand that those 45 souls that passed away, and said some of them are very, very young. Some of you might know the Billy Joel song, Only the Good Die Young. He's not wrong. But the way we look at it is someone who passes away young, it's because they've nearly done their potential. There's just a little bit more they need to do. Whenever we're born, we're taught that everyone's got a kates, an end time. You can't go beyond your kates. You can't. In fact, the way Rabbi Tatz puts it, everyone's got a certain amount of words we can say. Once you've said those words, it's time to leave this world, which is why we should be careful and be selective over what we say. So let me share with you how Gilgal works. You ready? L'chaim, everybody. Here we go. And I bet no one has ever demonstrated Gilgal on a tissue before. I'm going to try and do that. And it's based from the Arizal. There's a whole book about it from his student, Rabbi Chaim Vital. If you read it, called Shara Gilgulim, the Gateways to Reincarnation. The Ramban, Nachmanides speaks a lot about it too. And by the way, the Ramban and the Sefer Bahir explain this is the way you actually understand how bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to good people only understood because of the principle of Gilgal. In fact, the piece of Talmud in Brachot, where Moses himself, Moshe Rabbeinu, asked the question to Hashem, Sadiq v'raloi, And the answer, the Talmud says, Sadiq ben Rasha, Sadiq the son of Rasha. The mystics say it's actually referring to Sadiq ben Rasha, which means when we've sinned in a previous life, we need to come back and fix things up. Fix it. And that could just be a mitzvah to fix. It could be a character trait to fix. It could be a marriage to fix. Money. We'll see. And essentially, this is the way that Arizal explains it. Are you ready, everybody? How are we going to demonstrate Gilgal with a tissue a bit like this? And by the way, I'm going to explain it through the parable, through the using names that the Arizal says. The Arizal, who was just enlightened mystic, who was able, by the way, the graves, how we know where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried, and all the Sadiqim is from the Arizal. The Arizal was able to see, because they didn't used to have names on them. It was the Arizal who could see souls, who was able to say, oh, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is there, Rabbi Meir Baal HaNes is there, the Rambam's there, and he's the one who helped us put the names on all the monuments around Israel. So the Arizal explains that people in the Torah are reincarnations of each other. So we start off really with Odom. So this tissue will start off with Odom. And the Arizal says that the right shoulder of Odom, so when Odom goes to the next world, right, then the right shoulder of his, whatever this means, comes back as Hevel. Now go figure, it came back when Adam was alive. So sometimes you can be sharing souls with family members while you're alive. It's not as simple as someone needs to pass away and then you get their soul. It's much more complex than that. Hashem can navigate it, that he'll take an element of the soul and put it in the next soul whilst they're alive. So Hevel, okay, so Hevel now is the right shoulder of Adam. And then it says, the next reincarnation of this tissue per se was Noah. Noah, so it goes Odom, Hevel, Noach. And then after Noach, when he goes up there, the next thing is, he becomes Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses. Imagine? And then, by the way, the mystics say, part of Moses becomes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So the Arizal says you have Adam going to Hevel, going to Noach, going to Moshe, going to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, just for example. Meaning, we get to the next world, and when it comes to the court case, Hashem might say, there's an area that you haven't yet achieved. It's like we've got a project. We've got really 613 projects to do. And if you've done 200 of them, but there's another 413 to do, often Hashem will say, the court will say, it needs to come back to do it again. The Talmud says, for example, someone that's never put on tefillin ever in his life, that's not a good thing spiritually. So if there's any men in here who are Jewish and haven't yet put on tefillin, please, 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 you can message me later. I'll send my son-in-law round, or I'll go round myself, and we'll go and give you some tefillin with pleasure, because it's absolutely huge, but really it's every mitzvah like that. Every mitzvah is like that. So it's super complex. You see, we have the whole body. The way our body is a reflection of a spiritual body. And essentially, sometimes you're coming back to fix up the right side, which is more the chesed side. Sometimes it's more to fix the left side. Often people who are left-handed, left brain, my dad, for example, very rational, very gevura, they need to fix that area. People very arty, that's an area, in other words, and this is where it gets complicated, your strength is part of your mission. So if you want to work out what your tikkun is, first and foremost, you have to understand what you're good at and maximize it and fly with it like a bird. It's natural for it to fly. What is natural for you? Those artists amongst you, those musicians amongst you, those rationalists amongst you, those accountants amongst you, make sure you utilize your gift. That's part of your mission. Moshe Rabbeinu, which is Netzach, is using Netzach. Yosef at Sadiq, which is Yesod, is using Yesod, David, which is Malchus, and it's already all connected to the Sfirot, essentially there. As we said, the human body is really a reflection of the spiritual system. So Chesed's on the right, Gevurah's on the left, Tiferes is in the middle, Netzach's the right leg, Hod the left leg, as such, Yesod and Malchus. And essentially, each one of you are coming from a different aspect of the Sfirot. And some of you might be coming to perform a specific mitzvah. How many times can we come back? So it says in the book Derech Hashem and the Ramchal, and many Kabbalists talk about 3 times. 3 times. You come back 3 times and you're out. Three chances and you're out. But the problem is, the Sefer Abahir and many other mystics talk about you can come back thousands of times. Literally thousands of times, it says. So how do we reconcile that seeming contradiction? And the answer seems to be like this. If you come back and you haven't grown at all and you failed miserably, you have another chance and then another chance. But if, God forbid, you've gone backwards 3 times in a row, that's it, you don't get another chance. But if you're growing, if you're improving, if you're perfecting without being perfect, you're on the right path, but you're not there yet, you can come back as many times as needed. Come back again and again and again and again, no problem. So please God, those of us who are learning right now, we're on the right path because we're learning, we're growing. But what's really interesting, my friends, is first of all the Zohar. The Zohar speaks about, which talks about Gilgal, actually in the part of the Torah called Mishpotim, which is the laws between man and man with regards to finance. And the mystics explain, therefore, when it comes to money, it's even more connected to Gilgal. And therefore, number one, make sure, God forbid, you don't owe anyone money ever. So really be in a place where you don't owe money. If you owe any money right now, try your best to pay it back as soon as possible. God forbid to have to come back to owe someone money. In fact, when the Baal Shem Tov taught his yeshiva and taught his dearest students the principle of Gilgal, he used money as an example. And the story goes the following, that the Maggid of Mezrich, his number one student, the Baal Shem Tov said, it's time, you're ready to learn Gilgal from an experiential perspective. What I need you to do is, you know, the stream near where we live, there's a big tree there. I want you to go and hide up on the tree. Watch, but you're not allowed to intervene. You're not allowed to intervene. You watch, you spectate, you learn, and then you're going to come back and we'll chat about things afterwards. The Maggid said, Rebbe, whatever you say. And he went up on the tree and hid amongst the branches. And he watched a movie in front of him. What was happening? There was a stream. And there was a soldier on a horse who came to have a bit of the water from the stream, a bit of a rest, goes back on the horse, drives off, rides off. But he dropped his money bag. He dropped his money bag. He sees a little kid wandering now on the meadow by the stream, who sees the money bag, looks around, is anyone there? No, says, great. Yofi, sababa, as you say in Ukrainian, and he went and he picked it up and took it home. Then he watched a tramp. He was obviously just looking for some water, for some drink, and he crashed out by the stream. By now, the soldier had realized he'd lost his money bag and he'd come back to the stream, and he woke up the tramp and said, give me back the money. You've stolen my money. And the tramp says, what money? Are you joking? If I'd have money, I wouldn't be a tramp and I wouldn't be here anymore. And the soldier says, you're lying. And he started beating up the tramp. Started beating him up, giving him a beating. He left. The tramp eventually limps away. And the Maggid thinks, okay, I think I'm safe now. And he comes down the tree and goes to his Rebbe and says, my dear Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov, I get it. I get number 1 and 2. I get how, obviously, in a previous life, that soldier owed that young child some money. And now they've had to transfer. But Rebbe, I don't get the whole beating with the tramp. That was just cruel. What is that about? The Baal Shem Tov said, and how he knows is because he has heavenly insight. The Baal Shem Tov says, that tramp was the judge in the previous court case that got it wrong. In a previous life, though two were litigants going against each other. And the soldier had taken money illegally from the soul of the young child. And the judge got the court case wrong. So the judge also needed fixing. That's deep. That means maybe some of the traumas in our life, some of the issues in our life, some of the challenges in our life actually haven't necessarily come from what's happened in this lifetime. It could have actually been more as a result of previous lives. This great sefer called the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, there's a book about Gilgal referring to him. And he goes like this. Again, it seems there's a lot of reincarnation stories happened around the time of the Maggid, because he was really revealed a lot of the secrets. The Maggid went to a bris. He went to a bris milah. He went to a circumcision. And in that circumcision, again, this will be another traumatic Meron story. During the circumcision, the baby died. And the very holy parents were struggling, really struggling. Hashem, you asked us to do the bris. You asked us to do the bris. And now you've killed our child. So eventually they came to the Maggid and said, please can you explain to us what on earth happened? Why did Hashem take our child? And he goes, come at the end of the year, which is, by the way, a really important principle. Because when you're going through trauma, when you're in acute pain, then is not the time for philosophy and theology and thoughts and deep understanding. That is the time to be consoled, to be hugged, to be given space. Anyone, God forbid, is a close family member of one of the 45 that passed away, won't be able to hear any of this. And this isn't for you. Listen to this in a year's time. This is for us distant relatives. So the Maggid said, come back to me at the year. At the end of the year, they came back to the Maggid and said, so no, why did our baby die? And he said, let me tell you something. Do you know who your baby was from a previous life? Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the Mechaber, the one who wrote the Shulchan Aruch. When he got to this next world, when he got to Gan Eden, the Shulchan Aruch begged Hashem, like this previous story. Said, Hashem, one of the things I wasn't able to do is I wasn't circumcised at 8 days old. I was delayed. I was jaundiced. I didn't merit to have Brit Milah on the 8th day. Please, please, please let me come back so I can complete that. So Hashem says we have to wait to see the family that can handle it, that's holy enough, that's has emunah enough. And the Maggid said, you're the family who merited getting the reincarnation of Rabbi Yosef Cairo. And if any of you have loved ones or family members or friends who have lost young children specifically, it's really important to understand this principle of Gilgal, that they were holy souls in a previous life who just need a little bit more time, just a bit more. So the Sefer of the Bahir explains that, as we said, that's how we understand why bad things happen to good people and at good times, because of the previous chapters in the book. But it's more than that, because actually it says that Arizal and Shar Gilgulim, something very complex, which I can't really at all explain now, but I can just tell you to look into it if you're interested. Again, you can go to Kabbalah online on Chabad.org to start looking at the translation of it. I think Safari also has a translation. But essentially what he explains is, there's 5 parts of the soul. The highest part, Yechidah and Chaya, isn't really relevant, but the next 3, Neshama, Ruach, and Nefesh, is really relevant. And the Arizal explains in Shar Gilgulim, by Chaim Vital's writing, that sometimes it's the Nefesh which will come back and that needs to be fixed. Sometimes it's a Ruach and sometimes it's a Neshama. So ours, we haven't got a clue, right? Only the greatest mystics could tell us what we are, but it doesn't really matter because irrespective, we've got to do the best we can. But either we can come just from a Nefesh and we're here to fix the Nefesh of a soul, or we're here, even though we have those 5 layers as well, but we're essentially fixing the Nefesh layer of a previous life, or higher, we're fixing the Ruach of a previous life, or higher, we're fixing the Neshama of a previous life. just to show how complex it gets, super complex. Then you have the principle says that Arizal, that we can come back, not just as humans, you can come back actually as an animal. Chovetz Chaim says people who speak Lashon Hara can often come back as a dog because of their bark. We're barking when we're humans, so then Hashem says, okay, you've got to come back and learn your lessons. If you say, what lessons can you learn as a dog? The answer is, if you've still got your consciousness, if there's some spiritual consciousness there, then of course you're learning, you're regretting. You see, the idea of reincarnation is to learn from the errors. So for example, when I asked Rabbi Hillel to explain to me what is the tikkun, what is your tikkun, he said to me, it's your Achilles heel. What is your biggest weakness, my friends? You know, who's got an anger problem amongst you, and jobs are ruined, and relationships are ruined, and family relationships are ruined because of anger? Then that's probably your tikkun, and that's probably so strong because in a previous life you haven't fixed it yet, so it's an unfixed. It's like part of the kitchen, which just is a part of it's an unfixed area of the kitchen, right? It's a broken fridge. So if you've got a broken anger area, that which needs to be fixed. If it's ego, it's that. If it's laziness, it's that, but it's something which is prominent and prevailing, and a very strong Achilles heel is very much going to be part of your tikkun. And the biggest mistake, my friends, is we say, whoa, that's too hard to tackle it. So it comes to something like Yom Kippur, we say, okay, Hashem, I'm going to work on doing the things which come easy to me. And you should do that at times, but in addition to that, you do need to face your demons. You do need to face that self-sabotage part of you, which is really bringing you down, and deal with that, for sure, which is really our tikkun, the Achilles heel, and face it. So therefore, when you're an animal, or we're going to say a plant life, one can come back as a tree. Or a domem, even more, an inanimate object, you can come back as a stone. A cliff, one of the worst things apparently is to come back as a cliff, because you can be thousands of years with nothingness. The mystics say if someone who wastes their time, God forbid, they can come back as a domem. They can come back and, you want to waste your time? I'll show you what it's like to waste time, and then you won't waste time anymore. And therefore, we're so privileged we're alive now, because we can learn the lessons now without, God forbid, having to learn them in a very much crude, painful way. There's something very deep, which again, I can't explain tonight, but I'll just say it out, and you can do with it as you want. The Arizal says something called Ibu Neshama, which sometimes you can be impregnated with the soul of a Sadiq to assist you. And it can even be just for a certain time. I don't know if any of you have felt this. There's been a time in your life when you had this like huge, it's like you had an extra battery inside you. You were just like supercharged, supernaturally charged, and you were able to achieve great things at that time. It could be that Hashem allowed in, it's like in your car, to have a passenger, a great Sadiq to come and accompany you. That's what we call Ibu Neshama. And then, God forbid, there's something really very scary, which, please God, will never happen to anyone we know, which is sometimes the soul isn't allowed into any of those areas. It has to wander. So it's not allowed either in a human, or in an animal, or in plant life, or in inanimate objects, and it is there to wander. But then it has, God forbid, the ability to, God forbid, get into humans. And that's what we call a dibuk. And if you want to look up a dibuk, D-I-B-U-K, that's the whole idea of exorcism, where it comes from. There's many stories of Kabbalists having to exercise, and the dibuk starts talking and talks in a different voice, but is scared of the tzaddik. But I'm not going to go into that and tell you dibuk stories, because then you really won't be able to sleep tonight. So that is just in a nutshell a little bit how Gilgal works. And you have in the Torah someone like Chava, Eve, who comes back, we're taught, says that Arizal is Esther. You have the snake, apparently came back as Haman. You have Mordechai, who actually the Arizal says was a reincarnation of Jacob. You have the 10 brothers who sold Joseph, who we're taught comes back as a reincarnation of the 10 martyrs, including Rabbi Akiva, who died at the time of the Romans. So what I'm trying to say is, so much of life, we haven't got a clue really what's going on. No clue. And then we have the audacity and arrogance to say, it doesn't make sense. Obviously, God doesn't know what he's doing. We're so far away. You know, there's a beautiful story that is from the Baal Shem, there was not the Baal Shem Tov, but there was another tzaddik, and he was called the Baal Shem of Michelstadt, near Frankfurt. And when he was even just 5, he was this child prodigy. He was unbelievable, this kid. Unbelievable. And the Count heard about him and wanted to test his genius. So he thought, I'm going to create a great test for him. I've got a huge palace, thousands of rooms. I'm going to hide in one of the rooms and ask him to come and find me. And that was the test, that he asked this little 5-year-old boy, the Baal Shem of Michelstadt, to come in and find the Count in one of his rooms. So the boy is walking down the gates towards the palace, looks around, walks in the palace, and is able to go straight to the right room, knocks on the door, and says, "Hi, I know you're there." And the Count opens the door and said, "How did you know? How did you find out?" And the Baal Shem of Michelstadt said, "Well, when I was outside, I saw that the curtains were open in every single room, letting the sun in, apart from one room." So it was a bit obvious. And then when he was older, and this is what I want to share with you, he said, "From this I learned an amazing lesson. When the curtains are closed from Hashem, when Hashem's hiding, that's when you know he's there. That's when you know he's there. When a tragedy like last week happens, that's what we call Hess there upon him, total concealment, because it was a time of such holiness, of such unity, of such beauty, of such joy. And then tragedy happens a little bit like what happened in Netanya in 2002 on Seder night, when 30 people were killed in a Hamas terrorist attack. On the night where it's called Leil Shimurim, where you don't have to say even Shema, because Hashem protects us. And yet on that night, there was a terrorist attack. So whenever there's Hess upon him, like the Holocaust, whenever there's Hess upon him, says the Baal Shem of Michelstadt, that's where Hashem is. He's there with love, holding on to us, hugging us. But what I'm trying to say is, in life, when things don't make sense, it could be either because of reincarnation. But what we know definitely, Hashem's right there. He's holding on. But I want to finish off and explain to you that actually it's not just from Torah where you have evidence of reincarnation. You actually have it in science as well. So I really recommend a cool book from a doctor who's very much not a rabbi. He happened to be Jewish. He wasn't apparently at all learned of Torah in any way when he wrote his book, called Dr. Brian Weiss, who, a Yale grad. He went to Yale. He became a very leading, eminent doctor, and he wanted to specialize in a kind of psychotherapy. And there was one day he was having a session with a patient called Catherine. And this patient, Catherine, nothing worked. He tried everything. So he said, "You know what, let's try some hypnotherapy." So he had some hypnotherapy with Catherine. And she related forgotten memories of her childhood. In one, she recalled a terror at the age of 6 when a gas mask was placed over her face. Another, she'd been pushed into a swimming pool and nearly drowned. But nothing was working. And he said at one point, "Catherine, go back to the origin of your trauma. When's the first time your trauma happened?" He said in hypnotherapy. And Catherine started talking about, in a different voice, how she was in a town holding her baby and she drowned. And Dr. Weiss is now very confused, but the next week she comes back and she's feeling a lot better. For the first time, she's now feeling relief. She's got stuff off her chest. She's starting getting growth. She's not, some of the phobias of the past, she doesn't have any. It's bizarre. Her fear of water and drowning vanished. Her fear of choking was diminished. She was sleeping better. But still, Dr. Weiss was very confused. He was skeptical. And he kept on hypnotizing Catherine and getting back. He wanted to know more about this and more about this. And then one day, she says, when she was under hypnosis, I just want to tell you, doctor, that I'm here with your father and your son. Your father says you'll know him because his name is Avraham. His death was due to his heart. Your son's heart was also important because it was backward, like a chicken's. And now Dr. Weiss was speechless. He was speechless because indeed his father had died and everyone knew him as Alvin, but yet how did even she know that actually his Hebrew name was Abraham? And his son he was born with the terrible condition of his heart, which was backward like a chicken. And from that moment, he realized that there's truth to reincarnation and started investigating, doing a lot of investigation, and wrote this amazing book called Many Lives, Many Masters. And I'll tell you one more story from this book because I think it really brings reincarnation into a lot of reality, because a lot of you are dealing in relationships where there's different people come into your life. And the Arizal says that actually we have more than one soulmate. Not necessarily we have to meet them, but sometimes in life we need to also meet our zivug sheni, our second soulmate. And often we actually meet the people that we're meant to meet, that we're predestined, all to do with reincarnation. So he has another book called Only Love is Real. And this is the story. He had Elizabeth and Pedro, who were both having therapy with him. And the only thing that he understood, there was a common denominator, that when they spoke about their previous life, the key lifetime they shared occurred in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. Under hypnosis, Elizabeth, who was not Jewish, and by the way, in Gilgal, Jewish people can come back as someone not Jewish, and vice versa. A man can come back as a woman, vice versa. So Elizabeth, who wasn't Jewish, remembered the stones of Jerusalem with their distinctive coloring, which would change according to the light of the day and night. Her father, whose name was Eli in that life, worked as a potter. Elizabeth remembered she was a young girl named Miriam, described her detail in her father's warm, gentle touch. Then she said a couple of days, Roman soldiers arrived in the village and brutalized him for sport, tying his ankles. When they were finishing with him, he was coughing up blood and dying. Little Miriam ran to him, cradled his head in her lap, and told him she loved him. She watched the life leave his eyes. She never recovered from that tragedy. That was her trauma. Several weeks later, Pedro went into a deep trance, and he recounted the life of a man who was dragged over some rocks by soldiers dressed in a short leather uniform and boots. As he lay there dying, his daughter ran over to him, wailing and sobbing, "I love you, Daddy." Now he was really confused. He was really confused now. 1 minute, they're each other? That's the daddy and that's the daughter? In the same story, my two patients? They continued their therapy. He tried to draw out more details. He thought, so he said to Pedro, "Is your name Eli?" And Pedro said, "How do you know that? How do you know that?" He said, "I don't know, it just popped into my head." And now he's understanding and he's thinking, is he allowed to nudge destiny along and arrange to have their appointments come out one after the other? But it didn't work. When they passed each other in the waiting room, they were cordial, but nothing came of it. Dr. Weiss tried the same tactic again, nothing came of it. Finally, after the weeks passed, Pedro and Elizabeth each ended their therapy with the doctor. However, destiny was not to be denied. The day Pedro boarded a plane to New York, Elizabeth had tickets for a flight to Boston. Arriving at the airport, she was disappointed to find out her flight had been cancelled. When they offered her alternative flights, it was the same flight that now Pedro was scheduled to fly on. Before either of them boarded the flight, Pedro sat in the waiting lounge and noticed a woman out of the corner of his eye. He realized that was the woman he'd seen in the office. And they smiled at each other. They started talking. They eventually married, had a child, and told the doctor. And who knows why we meet, who we meet, why we meet them. So complex. but it's to do with reincarnation. One final story about reincarnation before I close, and I'm happy to take questions. There's also some other great material I highly recommend if you want to check them out. Dr. Ian Stevenson, probably the best book on it, called Children Who Remember Past Lives. He did research into 1,000 people, 1,000 children, and then he went and he looked back. He did research. In other words, he sourced to find out if their previous life could have happened. And did it make sense? Did the story make sense? And the vast majority of the cases absolutely made sense. In fact, there was a doctor, Dr. Helen, who was super skeptical, she was scientifically really appalled at this new kind of fad of science trying to prove reincarnation. So she tried to disprove it, also doing hypnosis and going back to previous lives and doing research. And then she realized it was true as well, because she had 90% accurate cases when she did research. And she's also written a great book, you can check it out, called Life After Life. Amazing stories, like a toddler in Sri Lanka who said the story about how in a previous life, it was a girl who drowned, pushed by her brother, and then he actually found the city where it happened and the family that it happened to. Amazing. But there's a really wonderful story I want to end with, which is from a book called Jonathan Gershom, who wrote a book called Beyond the Ashes, because maybe some of you have got this as well. I've got someone close to me who tells me the same. They're convinced that they were a previous life from the Holocaust. I don't know if any of you have, and obviously post the Holocaust, which I don't really understand, because from my understanding, most that passed away in the Holocaust shouldn't need to come back because they're the holiest of the holies. If you die al Kiddush Hashem, you shouldn't need to come back. But I suppose, like everything, there's exceptions. So some people have come back, but their previous life they died in gas chambers. And Jonathan Gershom says the following story about a guy called Ryan Arthur Risch, who was born in 1977, a Catholic in Nebraska. But he was having nightmares and phobias about barbed wires, about leather boots, about German Shepherd dogs barking. He was literally having trauma as if he went and experienced, but he didn't understand because he wasn't Jewish. He couldn't get his head around it. One day when he was on a chat room, he came across a Jewish person, started conversing with him, telling him about it, and realized that it looks like that in a previous life, he started really recalling how he died in a gas chamber. And the amazing story was, in 2010, this Ryan realized he wanted to convert to Judaism. He moved to Israel. 2011, he'd converted. And now he's studying to be a sofer. And he remembers that in a previous life, he was a sofer. He wrote the scrolls of a Sefer Torah as well, which is really deep, really, really deep. Just to end off, and then one of my favorite books, a book I really recommend called The Garden of Emunah, because again, at this time, this is what we need in life, my friends. We need Emunah. And I said, Emunah isn't something when things are going well. Emunah is something when things are going badly. And for me, it's a beautiful story that Rabbi Arush explains from a personal story that happened to him, that he had first-hand evidence about. So let me finish off with Rabbi Arush's story, then I'm happy to take questions. He said there was a beautiful young lady, a daughter of one of the community's most prestigious and respected families, who married a rich, righteous merchant. The early years of their marriage were blessed with happiness, abundance, children. The modest wife became a wonderful mother, utilizing every free minute from her busy schedule to do good, giving charity. Suddenly, disaster struck. Their home, a bright beacon of charity, good deeds, and loving kindness, became a scene of agony. A drunken soldier viciously abused and mutilated and murdered the couple's 3-year-old son. So this amazing, wonderful, holy, holy couple, having a beautiful baby, died tragically. The entire community was appalled. Thousands joined in the mourning. No one understood. Is this the reward for a righteous couple? He's a little tiny toddler. Why would he have to go through that? Shortly afterwards, another tragedy happened. Like this time, the father had fallen deathly ill. There was tehillim round the clock. Everyone was trying to help. But the doctors gave up hope. They said the end is near. And tragically, he died too. So now this poor woman has lost her son, has lost her husband, and she's obviously a wreck. And she's not coping, and she believes she's going to be depressed forever. A few years had passed, and she had an elder son, and that elderly married son of the young widow came to wish his mother good Shabbos. He said, "Good Shabbos, Mummy," and she started crying. And the young man said, "Mummy, 3 years have passed. You've cried enough. You need to start living again. You're going to be a good catch. Maybe you're going to start dating again." And the young widow realized now she's being told off by her son. She says, "Okay, I've got to start trying with firm resolve to overcome the sorrow. Am I more merciful than Hashem?" She said, "Of course not. I've trusted Hashem. So I've got to be happy. I've got to find happiness. There's so much good in this world. I've got my son. I've got my health. I've got Hashem. I've got to move forward." For the first time in years, the widow slept soundly and peacefully. She realized that the gap wasn't just her husband and son, it was emunah. She was missing emunah. And she went to sleep that night and she had a dream. She saw herself standing in an exotic garden of beauty. She understood she was in Gan Eden. She saw an image of an old man with a long beard. He approached her and said, "Would she like to see her husband?" She said, "Yeah." He led her to a magnificent palace where there was a young man giving a Torah lecture to thousands of righteous souls. They said, "Can you see who that lecturer was?" It was your husband. She said, "Dear husband, why did you leave me? And now you're teaching Sadiqim? You were a businessman, but you were never a Torah scholar." So the husband smiled and said, "In a former life, I was actually a Talmudic scholar, but I never married. When I died, I was told that I can't have my designated place and be in the upper realms until I fulfilled the first mitzvah of the Torah, which is to get married and have children. Therefore, I was reincarnated again for the sole purpose of marrying you and having children. And now when I completed my tikkun, Hashem asked me to come home. And now I have a life of eternal bliss." But she said, "But our son? Why did it have to happen to our son?" And the husband said, "He's the lofty soul of a holy tzaddik, an extremely righteous individual. But in his previous life, he was kidnapped at birth. And finally, at the age of 3, he was redeemed by the community. But he never got a chance to be nursed. He never got a chance to be nursed by a Jewish mother. And he begged Hashem to come back to be nursed by a Jewish mother. And his soul tikkun was to come to earth and be nursed and raised by you." And he said, "But why was the death so horrible?" You could ask the same again from last week. And the husband said, "No, again, that our toddler son had completed his tikkun, but at the same time, there was a terrible decree for the city. The town had terrible pogrom. There was going to be a catastrophe. But the righteous soul of our little one volunteered to die a terrible death. I'm going to die anyway. Let me die a terrible death." The little soul volunteered. He became a holy martyr and sanctified himself as a public sacrifice. No one is allowed even to reach his lofty abode apart from me, since I was his father. And at the right time, you also will be able to go and see him." The husband faded away. Before he departed, he said, "Only by virtue of your emunah was I allowed to come and see you." And I think this is the real message of tonight. That whatever happens in our life, whenever things happen which we can't understand, which we can't conceive, know there's a bigger picture, know there's many chapters in the book. And critically, know that Hashem knows what he's doing and have emunah. Because when you have emunah, you have everything. And please God, this will strengthen us to improve in our area between man and man. So the tragedy of Rabbi Akiva's students, of the 24,000, they died, they weren't nice to each other. At least let us learn by that lesson. If that was perhaps a message of the 45 who passed away last week, whose numerical value is ma, which means what? which is what? But it's also the name of Hashem. One of the names of Hashem is 45. So we're meant to improve, and we should take on mitzvahs, and we should take on the very least not to trespass on each other and walk on each other and step on each other and give space for each other to be themselves and to respect each other's differences. And please God, if we do that, no more tragedy needs to happen ever again, Hashem. No more. Now we should be able to say, Ani ma'amin b'emunah shalemu b'vias HaMashiach. V'af al pi sheyisma me'im kol zeh. Achak eloi b'chol yom sheyovai. I wait for you every day. And now, please God, after all those terrible tragedies, it should be now time, Hashem. That please God, Mashiach should come and we should have Shavuos next week in a rebuilt Jerusalem.